Light a campfire, and everyone's a storyteller. Join us for some thought-provoking and beyond fireside chats.
Hello and welcome to Leave Our World a Better Place. My name is Kasia and today I'll be speaking to Cristián Saucedo, Wildlife Director of Rewilding Chile, a non-profit foundation dedicated to conserving the beauty and biodiversity of Chile and Patagonia. Cristián, welcome to Leave Our World a Better Place. Thank you so much for joining us. You're here to talk to us on behalf of Rewilding Chile, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing a little bit more about conservation in Chile. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Kasia. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk a little bit of what we have been doing as Rewilding Chile in southern Patagonia, and tell a little bit of what we have been doing along these years and where we are today and what is the scope of the foundation work.
Before we go into Rewilding Chile and the work that you do at the organization, what it stands for and all of that, I'd like to just set the background and find out a little bit more about you. I believe that you started off studying veterinary science and then you made the move to working in conservation and with wildlife. Could you tell us a little bit about that and how it happened?
Yeah, well, from a personal perspective, the wildlife and nature was, I would say, the main reason why I decided to study veterinary medicine.
So that came first.
Yeah. So that was the begin. And of course, in the meantime, as I was studying veterinary, I realized that not necessarily or a lot that we learned is more, let's say, in a traditional perspective of the veterinarians to just for human benefits, just with a traditional productive perspective. So at the end of the career, I had a chance, by one hand, to interact in, let's say, the traditional veterinary practice, but I also had gradually a chance to move to the conservation and nature, what really was my principal motivation to do. So through that, I had a chance to jump, let's say, to a project with the Chilean Park Service, with CONAF, who is the state body in charge of the National Park Administration. And I start to work there. So this is the short story how from a veterinary student, I was involved as today with wildlife and conservation.
Fantastic. So this might be a bit of a side question, but you say you started off with veterinary science with the intention of working with wildlife. Is it really, is this kind of a bit of an unusual direction in Chile? Is conservation something that's available for young people to study, or is the route that you took kind of the best that you had available to you at the time?
Yeah, well, that is a good question, because at that time I studied in the early 90s. I would say that almost nobody who was studying veterinary medicine, or very few, one or two as much, were really interested, let's say, in the conservation side. Today, things have changed a little bit for better, of course. There are more chance, but at that time was really unusual that a student, the scope was really was easy for professors to say, oh, the students who like condors, and that was me. And of course, over the time, today the status is totally different. There are other veterinary faculties that give courses just more focus on wildlife, on monitoring, on conservation and research. So by fortune, things had changed in a positive way, but at that time was really unusual. but anyway, was a kind of and before I was there were also some young Chilean conservationists working. So it's how things happen everywhere. So it just changed when things happen in terms of the time frame.
It's fascinating, though, and congratulations on being part of that groundbreaking beginning.
Yeah, well, we were a couple of, but there were so many fews along Chile that make that difference. And this is the reason why today there are much more people involved in studying and working with wildlife and conservation and protected areas, which is great.
And of course, today you're also in a position where you can, influence this a great deal more. I believe that your current post is wildlife director at Rewilding Chile. Is that correct?
Yeah, totally. Through the foundation work is a fantastic platform, not just to achieve the goals that we identify as a foundation, but also to inspire, to motivate young people to make a change. So it's fantastic to have that possibility from the foundation.
Absolutely. Can you tell us a little bit at this stage about Rewilding Chile? What is the organization? What has it been set up to do? What is its mission? And what are the steps that it's taking to achieve that mission?
Yeah, for sure. Well, the first to say is that Rewilding Chile is the legacy of Douglas Tompkins and Chris Tompkins Foundation. That was a long story of conservation in both Chile and Argentina. And Rewilding Chile is the legacy of that work. So it's the continuity of that work. And the vision that the foundation has is related with a planet. We believe that we need to secure a healthy planet with complete and functional ecosystems where all life forms thrive and communities develop in harmony with nature. So we really believe in the need to change how humanity is running the life that we understand as development today, and really to reconnect with nature. In terms of our mission, is focus is very related with national parks and the species extinction crisis. So our main tool for that is rewilding. This is why we are named today as Rewilding. And we believe that rewilding as a holistic conservation strategy along what we call the route of parks. So it's a long area in Patagonia, in the southern Patagonia. And we believe that with rewilding, we will be able to address the species extinction crisis and the climate crisis that we are facing globally. So through the creation of national parks and marine parks, through restoring ecosystem and species, and making a more connection or a stronger connection of local communities with nature is key on this challenge. And we believe that we are contributing to that, but of course, that we are not the only ones doing that. So for this is really a huge rewilding network at global scale that is working today. So our main area is located in the southern Chile, mostly in Patagonia area. And the big area is what we call this route of parks, that is, let's say, the Carretera Austral, the principal access to the south of Chile, through the one that you can visit 17 national parks, and it's a fantastic scenic route, beautiful landscapes and wildlife. So the change in terms of the economic, on how communities perceive their surroundings, the ecosystem, it's a challenge, because traditionally many of these areas, the original activities were related with livestock, with farming, or with timber harvest. So it's a cultural change that, of course, involves decision makers, politicians, because it's really to propose a new economic model for the country.
I think that's so key. And, it's very much the same. That sort of model of involving the communities is very much something that I think there's increasing awareness of around the world. And even in Africa, where we have a long tradition of national parks, there's growing awareness of how they should be structured and what communities need to get out of them.
Yeah. Well, it's challenging always in all places. There is no a magic receipt because every park, every community has a different sensitivity. There are different needs, different expectations. So it's really something that needs to be work for individual cases. But of course, we all know that is something really important because it's the only way how protected areas, ecosystems, and wildlife could persist over time. Traditionally, conservationists, they were just looking, let's say, for the wildlife, for the nature, not thinking even on the people, on the community. And when we were talking about rewilding, we need to put all together. So communities are as important as wildlife, as ecosystems. And the only way how our rewilding or restoration efforts are achieved with a long-term perspective is the only way is if we involve communities in along this process. If not, we will fail for sure. And the communities at the very wide sense, not just, let's say, the locals are as important as the regional, as the national level. So all the levels are really important because they all had different degrees of influence on what happens in our parks.
But they're all absolutely crucial for them to understand and to feel included.
Yeah, exactly. No, that is critical.
Cristián, you've mentioned the route of parks, and I know that you were part of the team that assisted in the creation of Patagonia National Park. Can we just speak a little bit about this concept? Obviously, you're trying to create greater integration between people and wildlife. Why is the creation of national parks so important in this context? Can you speak a little bit about that significance? And then also just tell us a little bit of the story of the creation of Patagonia National Park. How was it accomplished? What were the challenges? What were the victories?
Perfect. Well, the first to say is that if we go back for the creation of parks in Chile, traditionally national parks have been managed by the Chilean state through the agricultural ministry. So traditionally, there is no a long story of relationship of Chilean citizens with our parks. So it's something really recent. I would say that from the last generation. So my grandfathers, my mom never visit a national park, but today you have a chance to see Chilean families, independent on your social position, visiting parks, enjoying nature, and this is a major change. So traditionally, the scope of decision makers in Chile was that national parks were marginal areas in terms of development. Of course, that they exist to secure land, to secure forest, clean water, to respond to the global commitments that the country has with other countries, international agreements, and so on. But never the national parks have been identified as as fundamentals for development. And I would say in the recent decade, as consequence of Rewilding Chile work, Tompkins conservation, this had changed because we put in value the existence of this, let's say, this natural capital, that if you make an investment plan through public use areas for national parks, campgrounds, trails, hotels, etc., they can really provide, in addition to the natural benefits that it's obvious that they provide, they can really become a motor for development, especially from the touristic perspective. So this is the reason why we start a couple of years ago talking about the route of parks. So the route of parks is, let's say, the southern portion of Chile that is, we have a main, let's call it as a road, but this road in many places is just gravel road, but it's beautiful. And along this road, you have a chance to visit some of these national parks, that they are 17, crossing temperate forest, fjords, channels, mountains, glaciers. So a variety of landscapes that is hard to imagine. Of course, that is impossible to do in a single trip because it's a huge, we are talking about over 2,000 kilometers long. And of course, that in some areas you need to take ferries, but it's a unique place in terms of beauty, in terms of parks. And of course, some of these parks today, they have very good infrastructure for public, with campgrounds, with trails, with outlooks, and others not yet, because they need to be incorporated into the state plan. So this is our, I would say, part of our major goal, that to put parks as pivotal, as centers of development for the southern areas of Chile, for Patagonia. And this, by fortune, is doing well because it's working, because the authorities understand the importance of the route, the value of the route, the opportunity that the routes represent for the country, for the districts, for the local communities. So it has been very powerful. The change that I would say, in the time that we have been working, we start with opposition. We start with people that they don't understand our objective. And today, it changed a lot. People understand the objectives, understand the importance, the opportunity, but it's a process, because it's impossible that the change happens from one year to the other. And for that, you really need to convince and that politicians and authorities are part of this project. So Route of Parks today, I would say that is more a Chile's project rather than just a Rewilding Chile project. Of course, that we were the first promoters, but we are one of many others that are very necessary to make that this excellent idea becomes more and more a reality. And this is talking about the route of parks. And if we move towards the area that I was directly involved, that it was the Patagonia National Park. This project we start in 2004, when the foundation decided to purchase a former sheep ranching land of over 80,000 hectares. And this land was just in between two already national reserves managed by the Chilean Park Service. So why we decide to buy this land? The reason was because it was a hotspot for biodiversity. It's a very unique corridor that connects the Andean Patagonian forest with the grasslands of Patagonia, and offers a unique altitudinal gradient from the valley bottoms to the very high mountains, and is habitat of some critical endangered species like the South Andean deer or huemul deer that inhabits this area. So these were some of the reasons behind the opportunity that we faced in 2004, acquiring this land, offering this land and other land to the Chilean state. And finally, after a long process, imagine that in 2018, so let's say 14 years later, the park was formally designated, created, And today the park is administered by the Chilean Park Service. It covers over 300,000 hectares. Huemul populations are increasing. Public access areas are created. There are campgrounds. There is a concessionary working inside the park. The community of Cochrane, let's say the surrounding communities are much more happy and engaged with the park, which was something hard to believe that it will be possible when we just acquired the land. So it has been a long process, but by fortune, we achieved the objective that was the creation of this park and many others. So this has been a landmark for Chile. The foundation was able to donate over 400,000 hectares of land, and we contribute directly to the creation and the protection of more of 4 million hectares in Patagonia, which is unique. This is one of we helped to create 5 new national parks and expand another 3 parks. So it has been a major landmark. Is part of one of the largest donation of land from a private party to a state at the global level, and it has been our model in terms of conservation.
It's a really remarkable achievement. And, I find it especially heartening that you talk about, the concessions in the parks and making them accessible to the public, because that's really so important, isn't it? It's always been said that you can't protect something if you don't understand it, if you don't love it. And it's such a key to allow people to access those wildlife areas and to really, feel passionate about them and want to protect them.
Yeah, totally. That is critical. This is why for a long time we have been working with the communities. In many cases, the local communities are very close of these areas, but they are really not connected. And even in many cases, they don't visit or even know the area. So since the beginning, we start working with the local school, with local leaders, and promoting outdoor activities, and not just, let's say, inside the park, but in any natural space around the district, because that is important. So rewilding, as we were talking, is to reconnect people with nature, and that is needed in all levels. So it's not just for people that live in the urban areas or in big cities, but it's also applicable to the neighboring communities, not because they just, let's say, in rural area or peripheral areas. We need to work at that scale as well. So it's very wide, the need of connect people with wild space, and this has been critical. We have seen unique change, like originally the local community of Cochrane, neighboring to the Patagonia National Park, they were really unhappy with the fact that we were promoting the creation of this park through a major change in the land use. Imagine what means a big sheep ranching farm with over 30,000 sheep, and say that will promote development, protecting huemul deer or creating space for public was crazy. So people, they really don't believe us at the beginning. And today we are in a total different momentum. So we have working with the young community. The park is a reality already. They have seen the benefits of that. So it has been a really powerful change. Of course, that there are people that is still, they don't like the park because there are so many pumas, and because there is a cultural issue behind this change, and it takes time. So we are all, as humans, we need time to understand change that happens, and in some case we never accept, and that is okay for all projects. But I would say that in general, the park today is much more appreciated. There is much more connection. And this is really something when you see people visiting the park and being amazed and surprised at the fact that they are encountering guanacos or pumas in the park, things that they never really happens that was possible. They never think that was possible to happen.
I'd like to talk about some of the wildlife species that you've been mentioning, and also, what Chile is known for. I think a lot of our listeners are very familiar with the African wildlife species, and I know I'm certainly a lot more familiar with them than South American ones. Obviously, some are really well known: the puma and the condor. Some of the others that you've mentioned, the huemul and the guanaco, might not be as familiar to our listeners. Could you tell us a little bit about, what are those emblematic species that you've been trying to protect? And what is their conservation status? What makes them special as well?
Of course. Well, we have been working with, as a foundation, we work with some of these species because some of them were in really endangered status. They were like in trouble in terms of numbers, in terms of distribution. And in other case, because they are really keystone species. Anyway, as a foundation, we believe in the intrinsic value of life. So let's say that all species, they play vital roles in the ecosystems. And of course, some are more visible or attractive rather than others. But and of course, over time, we have start working with some species, and we have been adding other species in our work. So I mentioned that we start of one of our primary reasons to work in Patagonia National Park was to contribute to the recovery of the huemul deer or South Andean deer, which is an endangered deer. The population estimated less than 1,500 left that just inhabits the south of the Andes in Chile and Argentina. We estimate that about 70% of the population is in Chile, or the habitat for this species, and 30% is in Argentina. This deer is the southernmost deer of the world, so it's the deer that inhabits the far south along the Americas. Is one of the most endangered species of the continent, and today its distribution is in Patagonia, but is in very fragmented and isolated populations. They don't live, let's say, in herds. They live in small family groups. We talk about subpopulations because in some case they don't have a possibility to connect, say, between individuals, to have genetic flow and all that. And it's a species that just have a single fawn per season, and females become mature about 3 years of age, and they face a lot of threats like attack by dogs when populations are nearby towns. They suffer disease that are transmitted by livestock. They are very sensitive for many viral and bacterial disease from livestock. And of course, as threats for other species, let's say the habitat fragmentation, fires, exotic species like feral pigs, like red deer, are a problem for the species. By fortune, today, the park has been a major refuge. It has about 10% of the world remaining population. And we have been working with the Chilean state in partnership, promoting the recovery of these and other subpopulations of huemul, which is critical. So we are happy that they are doing well in Patagonia National Park, but we know that in other places we need to reduce threats, to promote the monitoring, the radio collaring, and the recovery of some other subpopulations. And this is something that we have been working with the Chilean state through our program that we call the National Huemul Corridor, that finally is to develop a number of conservation efforts along the route of parks wherever is possible and needed for huemul. The other species that is very important and that inhabit the park and is a keystone species, a large herbivorous, that is the guanaco. Guanaco is a native South American camel that it weighs about 120 kilograms. Is our largest terrestrial vertebrate in Chile, South America. In Chile, because in South America there are others, but for Chile, our largest is the major prey of pumas, is the principal prey. And they tend to inhabit more the open, let's say the grassland, the Patagonian steppe. In the park, we have a population of about 1,500. During some census, we had count over 2,000. And they are very important because, as I mentioned, is the principal biomass for pumas. Pumas are the top predators of the area. They were killed in the past by the ranchers, by what we call leoneros. They play a major role as controlling guanaco population. But of course, they play a major role as top predators. So they provide food for a number of many other creatures of the areas, like Andean condors, caracaras, foxes. And that is very important in terms of the nutrients that are coming back to the soil, to insects that feed other animals. And by fortune, our population of pumas is pretty healthy. We have an estimated population of about 25 to 30 resident pumas in the core of the park. Of course, that this number is referred to adult residents because we have kittens and juveniles, and this is dynamic. But there is a healthy population of pumas that little by little is becoming more and more accustomed to visitors, and that is a big change. The fourth species is the Darwin's rhea or the lesser rhea. That is a flightless bird that looks like an ostrich that lives in the open, in the grassland. It lives and shares space with guanacos. In the district, the species is classified as endangered because it has been facing a local extinction because it has very low numbers, and we have been releasing birds in nature, let's say reinforcing or making an augmentation of population. We have been releasing individuals to the wild to increase the numbers. So we start with about 15 birds in the wild, and today we are in between the 60 and 70 birds, and they had increased the areas that they occupy in the park, which is a good sign of recovery. And our goal is to reach about 100 birds in the wild, and then we estimate that the population could be self-sufficient in terms of numbers. And the other species that I mentioned already is the condor, one of the large the large flying bird that we have, and a scavenger that use the park as a big corridor. It present very frequently on guanaco carcasses that are left by pumas. And of course, they don't just live inside the park. They live and they make use of areas that they have ranching activities. They fed on carrion provided by ranchers and farmers. And we run a project in partnership with the Chilean Ornithologists Union, and we release on a yearly basis between 2 and 4 birds that are rehabilitated and rescued and prepared to come back to the wild. Why we do that is because Patagonia is a refuge of the species, and we really needs to develop as much effort as we can to rescue individuals, because they are very valuable for the population, given the fact that it's a species with a long lifespan and a breeding rate pretty slow. So they just have one chick per season, and they lay one egg every 2 or 3 years. So it's a very slow rate of breeding, and they are very vulnerable to poisoning and that kinds of threats. So these are some of the species. Of course, there are many others like native ducks, geese, armadillos, Patagonian skunks. The place is beauty. It always has some surprise that is unexpected. So is sometimes people are just focused on the puma, and there are pumas. They are there, but not always you see them. But doesn't matter. Sometimes there are unique experience with other creatures that they are so beautiful and important in the ecosystem that make the visit and the experience unique.
Cristián, you've mentioned quite a few projects to do with various species, the huemul, the condor, the Darwin's rhea. Is there any specific project connected with a species that, that you would like to highlight that has really had tremendous success and that you're exceptionally proud of?
Well, it's a difficult question because it's like that I'm really proud of all that we had achieved at different momentums, of course, because
it's like trying to choose the favorite child. I know, I'm sorry.
It's like, what is your favorite animal or things like that?
Yes.
The truth is that I really feel proud of the big process. Not just, I would not just remark a single project or a particular project, but I feel that all the experience that we ran along these years has been very powerful and important at all levels that we were talking. Let's say Chilean citizens, international level, very local level, local authorities, because we had working and we still work with pumas. We work with the conflict with ranchers. We engage this program releasing condors that are really connecting people with nature. We are working in this major challenge at national scale, recovering huemul. Again, that is unique. So I really believe that we are making a big change, and not just for us. It has been very important, the bond and the connection with the Chilean state. We really believe that the only way how we can achieve more objectives, protect more land, have a long-term impact is in partnership with the Chilean state. And this is the reason why most of our focus in all our activities, the Chilean state through the different bodies is our partner. Let's say in the touristic component, in the conservation component, in the protected areas component, etc. So this is why I would not say that we of course, that the landmark was the big donation in 2018, but we are now in 2023 and we need to move forward. So I really believe that it's fantastic what we have achieved in terms to protect new areas, and it's already protected. It's formally designated officially, but there is much more to accomplish. And this is what we are promoting today, what we are doing. We are promoting conservation in the sea, not just land conservation, keep stronger our work with local communities. The route of parks is so long, so there is a lot of work to accomplish. We need to work and involve the citizen in the awareness that there are other wildlife species that are important and critical in our ecosystem. The small cats that lives in our parks, for instance, is an example of a recent program that we are running in some of the parks that we have been working. So I would say that the process has been, today is much easy to talk about conservation and rewilding than it was 15 years ago when we just started. So today there is more general understanding on what we are trying to accomplish, and there is much more better reception. In the past, we were in some way ignored, or we were in some way people, they don't believe on what we were talking about. It was really a kind of an eccentricity. This is good because we need hope to move forward with this. We are really, this is not an eccentricity, it's a need in terms of a global perspective. We are really facing a big problem with climate change. We are in a crisis in terms of extinction of species, and we really need to do something. And we are doing through the foundation, but we really believe that everyone is important and the action of everyone matters. And this is what we promote with what we do.
It's actually really interesting that you brought up that idea of the growing awareness around conservation. I was actually one of my next questions was going to be, about the projects that you are running for these various wildlife species. How accessible are they to visitors to the parks? Is there a way that people who are visiting these parks can not only view the species, they have the possibility of encountering these endangered species, but are there like centers or places where these visitors can go and learn about the projects that you've done, educate themselves and find out more?
Yeah, well, there are different. First, well, the species, as you mentioned, they are in different sections of the park, and I would say that the encounter rate is really high. So the possibility is, if you are moving at the proper time of the day to see them, is really high. And that is consequence of all these change that happened along this year. So we prohibited the employ of dogs. There were no poaching, etc. So we remove fences, we restore the landscape, and today we are visiting the wildlife at their home. And of course, there are more specific information that visitors can access. One is through our website of Rewilding Chile. In the park headquarters, there is a unique visitor center that was designed and was conceived by Doug Tompkins. It's very unique, and of course, it provides a lot of information of the origin of the foundation, the problem that we have in terms of this extinction crisis, and of course, specific information of some of the projects that we were talking about huemul, about condors. And we, as Rewilding Chile, we keep working inside the park. What it means? It means that we run with the Chilean Park Service. We have a formal agreement through the one that we keep running these programs inside the park in parallel that the Park Service is running, let's say, the general operation of the park. So we have park wardens that monitor collared huemul. We have park wardens that are in the acclimation pen when we have Andean condors being prepared to be released. We run a small breeding center for rheas. And of course, some of the members of our teams, of our wildlife park wardens, they are in the field. They are in some cabins inside the park in different areas. And from those areas, they patrol and they monitor the species that they are more involved. And of course, we support, in terms of patrolling and vigilance, the Chilean Park Service work that they have in the park. So in some way, and I had mentioned some of these species. I mentioned that we were working now with small cats in Patagonia and Pumalin Park. And of course, for all that, we year by year, we keep running programs, and we are adding some new activities, and not just in Patagonia Park, but in other parks like Pumalin National Parks and other parks along the route of parks. The idea is that what we accomplish for instance, in Patagonia, the successful experience we can in some way export to other parks along the route of parks and help and support the Chilean Park Service to run activities with huemul, with small cats, because we really believe that it's important to put in value, raise awareness about the role that these species play in these functional ecosystems that we were talking about. And they are really, they become a magnet for people, because it's not just the landscape, but it's the creatures that are in that beautiful landscape. and that is new. It's something new for Chile. And by fortune, we have this nice example of Patagonia National Park, and people has unique experience there. So, which is make me really feel proud of that. That all kinds of visitors, very local, international visitors, they are having such incredible experience in the park. This is something that really make me proud to be part of an organization that promote that this happens, this big change happened. In the past, in this same area, pumas were killed, guanacos were chased away because they compete by food with sheep, etc. So we change a bad relationship with nature, with wildlife, to very good relationship and harmony, and we are also promoting development through a different way. It's not traditional, but as a friend of mine talk, we are now producing nature. We are producing wildlife, and that is a capital, a natural capital that if you manage and think in a smart way, you can also promote development for all levels.
Something that I actually wanted to ask you about was, part of your organization's name. It's Rewilding Chile. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions about rewilding and what it means. I've spoken to people in some circles that think, oh, well, rewilding, you just take land and you just, don't use it for other purposes. You just leave it there to run wild and nature will restore itself. Well, that's a lovely concept to consider. It's really very far from the truth, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, rewilding is a concept that it has some years already. And of course, it has different meanings depending on how people employ and the context. So, and I would center my point, I would say, in what we understand as rewilding, that first of all is, I would say, to restore the damage that we produce to the land in all forms. So as simple as that. So when we are talking about rewilding, for me, is related with restoration, with recovery of species, and with active management. What means active management? It means translocation, returning species to the wild, reducing threats. In Chile, in many cases, we are not totally, many species, they don't become deplete, they don't become extinct, but they are in very low numbers. So we really need to control threats before we increase numbers, because if we increase numbers and we are not addressing threats, we are not doing well. It's not a good way to on how to work. So rewilding talk about to have functional ecosystems. So it's really ask the question: are all the species of this ecosystem present? Are all of them playing their ecosystem role? Because maybe there is a species that is there but is in very low numbers, and if it's in very low numbers, probably it's not playing the ecological role. So that species needs to improve the numbers to make its ecological role. That it could be an herbivorous like the Darwin's rhea, and it's also a prey for puma. So that is what rewilding talks about. It's not just the recovery of a single species, but is the recovery of the ecosystem as an integrity, and ask if all the relations of the original relationships of that ecosystem are in place. If not, what actions can we develop to recover or to improve that condition? Of course, as you mentioned, in some case, the rewilding will take place alone, without management. As you say, you buy a piece of land that has a previous use, and you say, okay, I will not touch. And of course, nature will take care. What happens is that it depending on the ecosystem. In some areas, that process will be slow. In others, will be faster, depending on the nature of soil or what was the previous activity. So it's really dependent on each case. But of course, rewilding is about to recover nature, recovering ecosystem, and not just centering about an individual. An individual is important, but in the context of a population, but not by its own. And I've heard in some case that rewilding is used when you just release a single individual. We're not talking about that. We are talking about rewilding as a big scale, as an ecosystem scale.
Yes, yes.
And the last concept about rewilding is that you work and you center your effort in some, let's call the keystone species. So what are keystone species? Usually are large or medium herbivores like guanacos, like rheas, or top predators like pumas. So these are examples, and this is valid for any place. Those are the species that you put more effort there, because if you work with top predators, you are indirectly benefiting many other species as well.
I think a part of it is also, you've spoken about creating the right balance for the species to thrive, but you also have to find the right balance between the national parks or the areas that you're rewilding and their neighbors, because otherwise you just, you have to set up a system that is going to be sustainable over the long run, and that will be protected over the long run. So I think that's also a very, very important part of it for me.
Yeah, no, that is important. I would say that in Patagonia, one of the major difficulties or challenge has been the conflict with pumas, especially because pumas were traditionally killed because, of course, they represent losses for sheep operations. And what we learn of our experience is that we combine monitoring and research with preventive measures on sheep herds. So we start employing livestock guardian dogs with our own sheep, with our own team, showing and learning about this process. And finally, we have an excellent reception of the local community, because they saw the benefits of the use of these dogs. We convinced at some point the agriculture ministry to provide, and we also provide some dogs for some neighbors. So in some case, people need some tools, but not theoretical tools, but practical tools. And in this case, the guardian dogs, the livestock guardian dogs, really become ambassadors in terms of conservation. Today, there are over 100 exploitations in the area of Patagonia National Park that employ these dogs with very good results. And what we achieve, we increase the tolerance of ranchers to pumas, because they address the issue of predation employing these dogs. So they don't need anymore to kill pumas like they did in the past, but dogs are sufficient. They are efficient to keep away predators, and predators are more focused on native prey. So this is just an example. Again, this is a challenge in all places, and each area has its own problems, but I would say that puma is in some way a very common problem in the southern of Chile, and with parks. And by fortune, I think that we are learning a lot about tolerance and changing into the traditional practices of livestock.
Something that you just said, that each area has its own challenges and its own sort of elements that you need to look at. And yet I think in another way, a lot of the conservation principles remain the same throughout. And I'm really, really curious about the similarities and the differences about conservation in South America and conservation in the African context. And I understand that you and some other members of the Rewilding Chile team had the opportunity to visit Beyond Pinda Private Game Reserve here in South Africa a while back. What was that experience like for you? What was it like to meet with the conservation team dealing with conservation issues halfway around the world to learn about the conservation projects that are taking place here? How did you find it?
Well, wow. It's a long answer. Let me try to answer. Well, first of all, I would say that South Africa represents for us a kind of a unique opportunity to learn from the best in terms of animal management and tourism and all this link about that some areas that were at some point really depleted of fauna, South African teams work hard, bring back species, recover their numbers, and make that of a business. So conservation has achieved, and also business and development through tourism. That in very general terms. The second is to say that South Africans did this in a very short period of time. So they move hundreds and thousands of animals, of wildlife of all size, and make this happen. So which is unique. If you start to analyze information of other continents, there are no others in the world that has been able to do what was being achieved in South Africa. So these were some of the reasons why we decided at some point to go there to South Africa. And we received a kind of invitation of and Beyond team. We visit Pinda Game Reserve, and we were really interested to know how these mass captures are made by Pinda teams in partnership with other game reserves, how impalas and wildebeest were translocated from one game reserve to the other, because for us it's really unique. Here in Chile, for instance, we don't have most of our parks. They can have fences, but they are fences for livestock. So we're talking about as much as 8 lines of wire. In some case, barb. In others, it's just single wire. But for us, it's a big difference to see the national parks in Africa or private reserves with fence areas, with electrified fence. Is a new planet for us, because in our case, our wildlife, we don't have big creatures like elephants. Our biggest creature is puma. So and we don't fence areas to control pumas. It's something that is really open from that perspective. So that is a big difference. I would say that here, and we don't have in general dangerous creatures. So for us, we can move easily by foot in all of our parks, and it is not the case in South Africa, where you have buffaloes, elephants, and African lions, etc. So it's really, of course, it has some difference, but the challenge for us was to understand how pragmatic and practical has been the South African approach to rewild, because maybe South Africans are not calling all this work rewilding. We understand it as rewilding. Doesn't matter as you name for me, but what really matters is the objectives that you are achieving. And if you are achieving restoration of a species, of ecosystem, restoration and connecting people, communities with wildlife, with parks, you are doing rewilding. So, and this has been unique to see how successful has been the work in South Africa. And not just in South Africa, I have seen how and Beyond team has supporting and has been involved in the movement and translocation of rhinos to Botswana, to other countries, supporting work in India. And by fortune, we also received some and beyond managers as Les Carly, as Simon, visiting our areas, which is great because really open your view, your mindsets about conservation. And it's unique. It's something that you can't learn from a book, from reading something or watching a movie or a documentary. It's really unique to have the opportunity to exchange experience with colleagues and people who has been working on this with many more years of experience than we are. And we learn, of course, of the success, of the failures, because it's how the experience is built. So the challenge is permanent, and by fortune we keep in contact with the teams. And not the last year around May, we had a fantastic encounter in Valencia, in Spain. Was a global meeting about rewilding practitioners, and there were the Beyond team was represented there by Simon, and was great to hear fantastic stories of all over the world, from India, from South Africa, from North America, from Europe, and many groups working with these rewilding efforts at ecosystem levels, at species level, and it's a permanent learning process. It's a never-ending process.
Given all the differences, do you feel that there were conservation tools that are used in the African context that you hadn't been aware of maybe before, and that you were able to take and adapt those methods or those specific procedures and use them in the South American context? Or is it just too different?
No, of course, there are some differences that they are major, and it's really difficult to think to implement, because they are totally different in terms of scale. So, for instance, what I was mentioning about that our protected areas, they are not, let's say, with a totally fence. They had a fence that is more to indicate that that is the border, but it's not a proper fence if you see from a wildlife perspective. That is a major difference. The other that was interesting for me, that in many cases, the livestock is really close to national parks and national reserves, game reserves, and it could be a health and a sanitary problem, let's say from tuberculosis and from many other disease that can be a challenge, especially if you are dealing with wildlife. I would say that the principal aspect that we learn from the South African work, the problems that we face with Chilean authorities a couple of years ago were the same that our South African colleagues faced 30 years ago. So they said, oh yeah, when we just started, it was the same. There were no regulations. And by fortune, it's a process. So you understand that the challenge that you face at your place, they are not so different of those that the South African colleagues face at their time over there. So it required patience, it required persistence, but finally you get there. The other important is that you can fail, and that is okay, because usually people think that if you fail, you are not doing well your work. So if you fail doing the best, it's okay. You learn from that and you adapt for the next procedure or operation and do it in a different way, and you learn from that. That was a permanent mandate of the South African colleagues, because all of this knowledge, of this impressive knowledge that exists in South Africa, is due to this pragmatic approach. When you can fail and you learn from that failure and you improve, and then you do well, and you are learning and writing the proper way to do. So all the experience and the success is based on this exercise of failure and success, and it's okay. The important is to be systematic and keep running the efforts. All the stories of South African, they are so much an inspiration for conservationists because they had achieved so much, not just in South Africa, but they are like supporting work in other countries, which is unique. So in some way, South Africa become small for all what these teams are able to do. And by fortune, we as Chileans and even our colleagues in Argentina, we are very inspired by the teams that have been working in South Africa so hard and being responsible for the recovery of many other species has been unique, and we keep still learning from that. Is as I said, is a never-ending issue, and every time that we face a new challenge, for sure we are contacting our colleagues in South Africa to ask for some advice because it's a never-ending process.
And I'm sure it must have worked the other way around as well. I'm sure that when some of our conservation staff were visiting you in South America, there must have been things that they looked at and said, "Oh, wow, I wish we'd thought of that."
Yeah, well, always trips, they represent new oxygen that come to you, new ideas, and are those things that you don't learn from a book or from a meeting in the computer or wherever. Is the only way is to be there, to share with people, to talk and experience.
You can't experience everything yourself, so the more you can share, the better it is.
Exactly. It's how it is.
Yeah. Cristián, it's very, very obvious that you've got a million things going on and that Rewilding Chile is involved in so many things all at the same time. Are there any next steps, any upcoming projects or project milestones that you are especially excited about and that you'd like to share with us?
Well, we have been recently involved in two major initiatives. One, I already mentioned a little bit, was the National Huemul Corridor. That is a formal commitment of the Chilean state through the Wildlife Park Service and the Wildlife and Livestock Agency to develop a number of conservation actions along the Huemul territory in Patagonia. It means monitoring, reducing of threats, the implementation of the first rescue and rehabilitation center for the species in Aysén, and including new areas for protection for huemul. That is unique, it's a landmark for Chile, and for sure, the idea is that other organizations and other partners become part of this alliance, of this network for the huemul recovery. The second initiative that I would like to remark is an initiative that we are running at the very end of the continent. We call the Brunswick Peninsula, is Cape Froward area. This is just where the continent ends before Tierra del Fuego. And in that area, rewilding with the support of collaborators and donors, we acquired an area about 92,000 hectares of land, and the foundation approached the president, the Chilean president, Gabriel Boric, to show the idea about the creation of these new protected areas. And the president was really receptive with that idea. It's also considering the inclusion of a marine protection area associated with this land. And there is other, let's call public land surrounding this area that will be eventually incorporated for this new park. So these are very good news in terms of conservation, because it's a mix of land conservation, of coastal and marine protection. It's an area where there are humpback whales, many birds that lives in the ocean. Is the encounter. There are many nutrients that flow from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. is the last portion where the last huemul, the Andean deer, lives. So it's the last refuge, the far south point where the species is encountered. So it has unique features that make this area as a paradise, and we believe that it will become a new national park soon. And we are working today with the Chilean state. So these are fantastic news for Chile, for Patagonia, for the world. Is a very important area and unique for its beauty. So these are some of the recent initiatives that we have been focused, and we hope to have some good news soon. And we are working to achieve the objectives in each of these two projects, the Huemul Corridor and the Cape Flower project.
Just to end off with, when I looked at the Rewilding Chile website, there's something that really, really struck me, and that's that the way that it speaks about how the future depends on the actions taken by each and every one of us today. If you could leave our listeners just with one thought, what would be the action that you want the listeners to take to make that difference? And how can everybody that's listening to this podcast help ensure a future for the world's endangered species?
Well, we are all responsible for the crisis that we are facing today. So this crisis is not a subject of a responsibility that states or presidents should tackle alone, but the involvement and the behavior of all citizens matters and make a difference. We know that we are in a big problem. The evidence is clear, and to make that change, the only way is that everyone makes something. And sometimes people think that they are far away because they live in a big city or whatever, but everything matters. Matters what you eat, what you consume, what you do in your weekends. You can be part of a local organization that is making a difference for nature, for predators, for trees, for the forest, to clean the water, wherever. There are many ways. We just need to analyze what we are doing, what we are consuming, how we can improve or support local economies, not just acquiring things that come from faraway places. Or when I'm doing a trip, I'm going to a place where there are good things happening or good examples that are taking part there. So I think that there are so many ways. We just need first to be conscious that we are in this problem, and that your individual action make the difference. Of course, it always have different expression. People just immediately think on money, but we're not just talking about money. We are talking about actions. And many of those actions don't even require money, require your time, your commitment, and your analysis sometimes on why you prefer one product versus the other. All that make the difference. So I invite everyone to be part of this rewilding effort, because we all, the actions of everyone matters, and it's the only way how we can address the crisis that we are suffering. The fact that we have species become extinct is just an alert, is a red alert, the face that temperatures are increasing again. So we have more than sufficient indicators to take actions, and this is finally what we need. And of course, if we are able to put these issues at the local communities, work with our local leaders, with decision makers, is something that is really important. So connect with nature, dedicate your time to nature, and that is something that I think that is important to everyone.
Thank you so much, Cristián. I think that actually breaks it down in a very easily relatable way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you also for giving up so much of your time. It's been absolutely fascinating talking to you today.
No, has been great to share a little bit of what we have been doing in Chile and Patagonia. And I invite the listeners to come down at some point and enjoy the beauty and experience Patagonia and the route of parks, and follow what the foundation does through Rewilding Chile, and keep on the loop on what we have been doing.
Absolutely. And hopefully we'll get a chance to chat to you again sometime in the future to get an update as well.
No problem. I will be more than happy to share news on our projects.
Thank you for listening to Leave Our World a Better Place. Don't forget to subscribe to make sure that you never miss an episode. If you'd like to find out more about And Beyond, please log on to our website at andbeyond.com.